I have a brother. I have one brother, Frank Wahlgren. He was district manager of the OG&E at Ardmore till he retired, and now lives out here in the village. And that accident and my coming to Oklahoma affected the lives of a dozen people. He came down here. I got him a job. He got all of $60 a month, a clerk with the OG&E, and the draftsman killed himself. And my brother was an outstanding fine draftsman in Iowa University. They gave him the job, and I think he got $65. He got $5 raise. Well, anyhow, he worked up to district manager at Ardmore when he had that entire area down there. He, and I have two sisters in the Eastern Providence. The older one is a registered nurse in Iowa, and about 6'1", and was red-headed, and my brother was red-headed. My dad had jet black hair and a red mustache, sort of an odd couple.
Yeah. Now then, your early education, where did you start school?
I started in Guilford, Iowa, and went 2 years in high school. Then took the Weather Bureau in those days had to train their own men. There were no schools teaching meteorology, no college, no nothing.
Was there such a science then?
Yeah, it was, but you had to read it. And the mathematics, and I took the exam, barely passed, and was offered Miami. And you know, in St. Louis, I hobnobbed with one of my best friends was Arthur Compton of Nobel Prize, and he was then the chancellor at St. Louis U. He'd bring the boys, his students, down to St. Louis downtown Rotary to meet an outstanding meteorologist, Harry Wahlgren. They'd sit at the table and ask questions all more than they ate. And one day I told Arthur Compton, I said, we called him by first name in Rotary, as you know. And I said, Arthur, I'm not going to fool you any longer. You know, I've had only 2 years of high school education. That's my limit. And then I studied. He said, Harry, that don't mean a thing. I said, no, it doesn't to me either, because I remember the song, but I don't remember the tune or anything, but the title. You don't know how much you have to know in order to know how little you know. He said, Harry, that's right. If I want anything in my automobile or my garden or repairs, I've got to go to my gardener. He knows everything. I don't know anything. And I knew Pulitzer, the publisher of the Post-Dispatch, Joe II, you know. His father thought he wouldn't be much of a newspaper man, but he was outstanding. He'd call me from Bar Harbor or Pulaski, Arkansas, where he had a wonderful hunting range, and to find out the weather. He called me one day and wanted me to send him a blueprint of rain gauge. I said, I'll do it, but you can buy a rain gauge then for $15. Now they'll cost you $75 to $100. Same blooming gauge. He said, oh, well, Harry, I want to, my gardener had anything to do, and I want to keep him busy. He's quite handy with metal. I want him to make a rain gauge. And he did. And he'd call me. He was going to have big projects, Bar Harbor, Maine, his summer home. And the long-range forecast, 30 days, was for rain and bad weather. He said, Harry, what about it? I said, well, they know, Mr. Pulitzer, they know as much about that as I do. The 30-day forecast isn't worth the paper it's written on. Nobody knows but God what the weather's going to be. He said, well, I thought that. So I said, well, I go ahead with the project. I said, you can, but I'm not responsible because I don't know what it's going to be. You don't, they don't. So he went ahead with the project, and I have a letter from him thanking me. He got the project finished. The weather, because you could have a wet 30 days. It could rain 7 inches the first day, and it's a wet month, and drought by the end of the month. Then Dr. not only Dr. Compton, but I knew the senators and Harry Truman's family. That was one of my most interesting experiences. John Snyder was Secretary of Treasury, and a good friend of Truman's insisted I go down. Is on a Tuesday when meet Truman train and meet the Truman. I said, I've got to go to Rotary. I'm on the program. He said, well, come down after. I said, well, it'll be 2:30. And I stalled around. So he said he wouldn't take no for an answer. And I went down. I was in the crowd, and I didn't want to horn in. But Mr. Finnegan saw me, and he called the Secret Service, and they made a crack the whip, took me at the end of it, and put me on that train. I met Mr. Truman. We stood and chatted when he knew I was a weatherman after Mr. Snyder introduced me.
They were rather scarce then, weren't they? Meteorologists.
Well, they weren't meteorologists, weathermen officially in charge.
Weathermen.
Yeah,
You hadn't yet developed the
no,
term.
they hadn't. Well, anyhow, I met Truman, talked to him, and I guess talked too long. Secret Service man, or his bodyguard, came up and tapped me on the shoulder. I was 6'4", weighed 210 pounds then, and Truman was a little man. And he grinned from ear to ear. He said, Mr. Wahlgren, I see I'm getting you in trouble. I walked through the train, and I thought, now Mr. Truman's tired. Thousands of shook. And she got up and introduced herself, and she asked about the weather and this and that. We had a nice chat. I started to go out the rear of the train, and Snyder saw me. He was in the stateroom. He said, come in, Mr. Wahlgren. And I met Margaret, who was in, and also shook hands. I thought, now she'll sit still. That'd be the proper thing to do. And I think it's Toady, Snyder's daughter. He called her a nickname. And we chinned and chatted on the weather for about 10 minutes. The finest people I ever knew. You couldn't have been meeting my own relatives. I couldn't have felt more at home. And I'm sorry to this day that I didn't vote for Mr. Truman. Have you any other questions?
Let's see now.
Brothers and sisters? I
No,
told you
I
about
think,
my wife. She was Marie Miller. And they bought that farm for, I might say, a square mile from Villa to May, the streets. They named every one of them. And 10 to 16. By the way, Villa isn't that Mexican. It's a cousin of Mr. Miller. He told me who she was. None of the family know. She's a woman. V.I.L.L.A. And Lynn is a county in Iowa. Cedar Rapids, Lynn Avenue, or Lynn. And Miller's a family named Miller. Ross, right here by my home, is her Uncle Ross Fisher. Lived here for years, and May is her sister Willa Mae Sinnix, and Willa Mae Meeks, a cousin in Springfield, Missouri. May Avenue was a cow path when
She certainly named this part of the town, didn't she?
Yeah, the town was only 8,000 people then. She said, Mr. Miller sold a square block just east of where the Miller home was.
This was what year?
This was 1901. When the boom came on, probably in about 9 or 10, he sold a square block to Skirvin for $10,000. And then Skirvin got thinking about it and wanted to put $10,000 in the hotel, and Mr. Miller gave his money back. In a month or 6 weeks or 6 months, you couldn't give the block away, Mr. Miller said. And if it hadn't been for his good friend William Meade, the banker here, First National Bank would have foreclosed and he'd have been bankrupt. But Meade came from the same little town in Iowa, Liston, Iowa, where the folks came from. He told Frank Johnson, the banker, lay off of Mr. Miller anytime you want to drop it, the loan, well, I'll take it over. He said otherwise, that's how close I came to bankruptcy. He had to give 5 square blocks in addition to Anton Classman and Chartel of the Oklahoma Railway Company, streetcar, to get streetcar service through his addition. And then, with all due respect to Mr. Classman, he opened up a sand pit in opposition to Mr. Miller on one of the square blocks. He didn't make a success. He went, it didn't go over because Mr. Miller was so established.
He already had the contract.
Yeah, and he was an outstanding fine man, one of the finest men I ever knew.
All right, we're ready now to start with what you found with the Oklahoma weather station when you came here. Was there one?
Yeah, the one of the 1923 class. It was built way out in the country in 1905, and I came here in 1911. The man that they put in charge was instrumental in putting it out there was sent away under a cloud. Charles Strong, he was also an Army sergeant, because Washington found out this Weather Bureau at 19th class was way out in the country. It wasn't in the city of Oklahoma City, that is proper. And they sent him away and sent Slaughter. J.P. Slaughter came in charge, and he was here when I came.
First was Strong, and then
Slaughter that I worked on. Of course, there were others before because it started in 1890.
He was the
old
one
Culberson building.
that the newspapers nicknamed.
Yeah, that's right. And Strong was sent, wanted to, the chief of the Weather Bureau, Willis Moore, wanted to become Secretary of Agriculture. We're in the Department of Agriculture then. And he sent Strong here to do his political hacking and get the Chamber of Commerce and others to back him for secretary. Well, anyhow, they fired Moore for his political activity and sent Strong away under a cloud. But in the meantime, I was here, and to embarrass Mr. Slaughter, they took me away and sent me to Little Rock. I stayed there till Slaughter got back, and Strong wanted me to go to Savannah, Georgia with him, but I didn't like Strong, and I wouldn't have gone on a bit. But Slaughter came back, and Washington and sent me back to Oklahoma City after about 4 months at Little Rock. And I stayed then until 43, turned down offers for better jobs. So I knew that they wouldn't accept me or appoint me as official in charge as meteorologist now, but official in charge then. But Walter Harrison started the campaign with a front page editorial that the Weather Bureau could do itself proud by putting me in. They started an avalanche of letters to Washington. They didn't dare do anything but put me in. And the funny part, Mr. Alexander, who many of you old-timers will know, he was a Republican chairman of the state, and he wrote, unknown to me, to the Secretary of Commerce, which we were in later, but then within the Department of Agriculture. Secretary of Commerce, a very glowing letter asking him to do everything he could to get my appointment. Well, then it turned out that the Secretary of Agriculture, my big boss, was a schoolmate and pal of his, and he was writing the wrong man. And I've got letters from senators and everybody under the sun that wrote in that I didn't know that they sent the letters later.
So you came to Oklahoma?
That's how I came. And then in 1943, a friend of mine was regional director of Kansas City, said, "Harry, how about going to Kansas City?" I said, "I can think of 1,000 reasons for not going. Can't think of one for leaving it this great town of Oklahoma City." He said, "Talk it over with Maud." He was a very close friend of the family. And the girls, I said, "Oh, I'll talk. I know they won't go." They did, and we went, and I'm glad they did, because I enjoyed it very much. I came back to Oklahoma with a pension probably 3 times what I'd had if I'd stayed here.
Let me check this, please. Beginning the equipment and just what you found when you came to the Weather Bureau as you were weatherman then. You still weren't meteorologist, weren't called that yet.
They were just plain weatherman. They had a lot of fun with us then. They had fun now.
But now you are a member of the
I'm
meteorological.
a charter member of the American Meteorological Society.
You're a charter member of it.
And by the way, there's an Oklahoma connection. Mr. Williams on WKY Weather doesn't know it, but I recommended him. They sent me the questionnaire, And after I'd recommended him, I told my brother and my niece and Mrs. George Short, George Short, the second wife, is my niece, and I told her, and she said, well, I went to school with Mr. Williams in Muskogee. We were schoolmates. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, indeed. Well, we would like very much now for you to describe the station. You've told us something about where it was located, but describe what did you have to do with then? You said you had your water gauge, your rain gauge.
Yeah.
Now what else?
Well, first let me say that the Weather Bureau was on Epworth campus. Epworth had just closed when I came. It ran from 18th to 22nd, and the class was to McKinley. And except for the Epworth buildings that had been abandoned, the Weather Bureau was stood alone. There were no streets cut from 18th to 22nd Street. That was just a terrace, and it was on that upper land. And I came here, they had the Weather Bureau building that stood there for years and still standing. But the Oklahoma City University got that building, and it reverted to them. I tried for years to get the Weather Bureau to get the title to that building while Chartel and Classroom were living, but they didn't pay any attention. And I'm glad now that the college got it because they sold it for a nice little, fairly good sum. And education. And I'm strong for education. I've educated 3 daughters. And I said I have a son-in-law at Yale teaching law, and 2 kids in Yale, another grandson in Purdue, who is now with Eastman Kodak for the summer in Rochester, another one at General Motors Institute at Flint, Michigan, another one went to Centenary, so I'm strong for education. Oh, by the way, an interesting story, Arthur Compton and I are good friends, and Eddie Rickenbacker talked to the Rotary Club. And I was from Iowa, and Eddie worked in Des Moines as a mechanic, so we had breakfast with him. And I told him my wife was quite a reader, and she had the book, Then We Were 7, I believe it is. He was on the van. I said, Eddie, will you autograph this book if I go out and get it? He said, no. I said, well, that settles that. He said, no, Harry, I'm going back to California now. I'll be back in my office Monday in New York, and they're cluttering up my office. I'll send you one. He sent me an autographed copy to my dear friend Harry Wahlgren, Meddy, and since then I've had correspondence with him. And I got to meet so many. Blackstone, they take pictures of celebrities come here and also in St. Louis. One of them that's a good one I like was Blackstone, the magician. They took several, but one they had me holding a cake of ice, and Blackstone made it disappear. Well, I'm glad he did. That ice was cold. Well, anyhow, then they took a picture of numerous pictures. Maud and I were going back to Buffalo during a hot spell, and at the airport, I said, Maud, I'm glad that the papers don't know I'm going. So we went out to the airport. Here was a photographer and a reporter. They took my picture on the American airline, showing the American very prominently, and said I was shuffling off to Buffalo. And the final story, a friend of mine in the Rotary representing the American airline came to me at Rotary and said, thank you, Harry, for the fine publicity. The picture appeared in the front page. So, and I met all, whenever they have a convention, I remember meeting Shaw Corral, and at the American Music Society, or Music Teachers Society.
From the Shaw from?
Shaw Corral, he's one of the outstanding choral directors. Still has his singers. Well, anyhow, that organization was started in my little hometown, Keokuk, Iowa, town of 14,000. Victor Herbert, the famous composer, was one of the leaders, and our music teacher had a beard, unusual in those days. P.C. Hayden, who we, terrible kids, roughnecks, Doug Polecat Hayden, they started that National Society that has thousands of members. So I've had such a thing, and J.C. Penney. I met him and seated him at a table in St. Louis, and we'd set two out-of-town guests at a table. I sat another man with him from Michigan. After the meeting, Penny looked me up and thanked me because this man and he had done business with me together in 50 years before. And Arthur Compton, I sent him with a bunch of outstanding doctors, and every doctor, four of them, gave him thanks. He said the finest hour they'd ever spent. They found Compton so fine.
In your profession now, tell us something about how it grew from the time you took it.
Well, you asked what the instruments were. We had minimum thermometer. The maximum is, of course, the mercury thermometer. It has a little break in the mercury, and that goes up to a high point stage. The minimum, that's alcohol, with a glass the alcohol drags the index down when it's cold, but it flows past it when it's warm. So you get the minimum temperature, a rain gauge, and of course a barometer that you read, and a rain gauge at 8-inch, and an automatic that recorded. And there's triple register, they called it, a mediograph, really. It was really four things. It recorded the sunshine every minute of the day, the rainfall, the temperature, and the humidity, all on this little thing. That was, there's no radio songs. As I said, that was invented by a Russian to go up in the air. But we had airplane observations. We gave contracts to various ones. I remember Mr. Knuckles had one here. I don't know where it is, off one. And he'd go up, but he could only go on nice days. He couldn't go in stormy. So in that way, I got to know quite a few aviators. In fact, Oklahoma City had the first aviation congress here. And we had governors from all over the country, and we had General Doolittle, we had C.R. Smith of the...
When was this?
This was way back, must have been in the 30s, because Moss Patterson was very active in it. Practically all these aviators, some of them that have died since, been killed in planes, were on this committee. Beverly Osborne was on the committee, I remember, and C.R. Smith, Doolittle, and Farley, who's now getting publicity in the paper. He's up way up in years. I'm 83, and he must be 85, 86. I have letters from him thanking me for the hospitality of the committee, and I remember. And I prize them very highly. Wonderful fellows, and I found in life that the greater, finer the men are, and the more brilliant, the better they are. They're on top, and they're not worried about falling off. But the so-called two-timer, four-flushers, I call them, he'd scare you to fall off. Well, we had those, and we took one observation a day. 6:30 in the morning, it had to be on in 20 minutes. And it had to be on because, remember, we were part of the signal corps, and everything was like the Army.
It had to be on the wire.
Oh, it had to be on the wire. A few minutes late, and you'd get a letter from Washington, and a couple of times that happened, you wouldn't have a job. It was Army procedure, practically. But I enjoyed it. And
well, when did you have time to get all these charts out then?
Well, we made the chart early in the morning. It started as soon as the reports came in. We put them on a chalk plate, and one of the student assistants did some of that work. Is Dr. Murdoch of Oklahoma City, Raymond Murdoch, who died recently, one of the outstanding rectal cancer specialists of the United States. He graduated from OCU or Epworth and went to Cornell, wanted me to go there and study art. because I had a flair for cartooning, and I came near doing it. He got jobs so I could work at night and go to Cornell University day, but I was engaged to Maud Miller, and I thought I got married. I'm glad I did because I'd have starved as an artist. And Chester Gould was a very good friend of mine. He started here, you know, in Oklahoma City. Dick Tracy. I advised him not to go to Northwest, to go to Chicago Art Institute or some other, because universities, their art was about like our primary is now. He went to Northwestern, married a girl, and made $1 million. And then you said experience. The thing that stands out in Oklahoma weather was November 11th, 1911, first year I was here. The sky took on a weird orange color, and people thought the world was coming to an end. It looked, and I was afraid it was. Ray Murdoch and I were coming back from our boarding house. Temperature was 83. It was over on 15th
What time of the
Street.
year was this?
This was November 11th, 1911. And we were in our short sleeve, 83 temperature. In a few minutes we were shivering. The temperature dropped from 83 at 1:30 to 32 at 3 o'clock, 17 above the next morning, and I believe it's 19 at midnight. So the highest and lowest temperature, even to this day for November 11th, in this area is November 11, 1911. And the years I was here, we lived with the Weather Bureau, of course, when I was in charge. I never got to sleep that night. At about midnight or 1 o'clock, the Oklahoma would call me. He had to say, Harry, the boys made a mistake. He's got the highest temperature November 11, 1911, and he's got the lowest. And I said, that's true. So the next year I told Morris Moore, who was city editor, I said, Morris, on that day, early in the evening, I said, don't call me tonight, let me sleep. He went off duty, and at 1 o'clock, the Oklahoma called and said, Harry, we want to get a correction on this November 11th. That sky took the word, and we had rain, we had hail, we had thunderstorm. It poured down, and trees, by the thousands, seedlings, the sap hadn't got down, were killed by this storm. This record was made, frankly, all this area, including St. Louis. But since that, St. Louis had one day, November 11th, 1 degree warmer.
Well, you had nothing to go by to prophesy that drop.
Well, we drew weather maps just like they do now, but we didn't put the fronts on. That was put on by Norwegians, Björknes. And I know his son very well. Now, photography is my hobby. I've got a half a dozen pictures of him and many other outstanding so-called meteorologists today. Some of the so-called outstanding meteorologists just aren't. They're forefront.
I noticed you said so-called.
Yeah, and this rainmaking. I don't think you can make rain.
Tell us about that.
Well, if the moisture isn't there, you can't make it. And if you could, you'd take rain from the western part of the state and dump it on Oklahoma City. You're going to have lawsuits galore. You can't make rain. One of the outstanding rainmakers wanted to make a contract with the Union Electric, and the head vice president came to the office, said, Harry, how about this contract, rainmaking for the Lake of the Ozarks at the Union Electric? I said, if you've got money to throw it away, just throw it, give it to me, don't throw it away. He went back to the president. A week later he came and said, you haven't sold him on it, he still thinks we ought to take contract. Luckily I took the Daily Oklahoman. This man has been sued. He had contract with the city of Oklahoma City for damage to buildings between here and El Reno that flooded by 6-inch rain. He had friends of mine, one of them Archie Kahan, that's in charge of the federal rainmaking, the federal side of it. Go on the stand and say that in a 6-inch rain he couldn't make over 10 hundreds. He won the lawsuit, but he lost probably a $50,000 contract in St. Louis. He doesn't know that.
Well, about what year was that? Between here and El Reno? I think I.
That must have been in the, after 43, because I was in St. Louis when I was taking the pavement. I'd say in the 40s during a dry spell. And of course, the 34 and 36 were the very hot, dry drought years, and that brought forth one of the best stories in the 90s I ever had. Maud and I were visiting these. We had 100 or more stations. We had a station in every county, a cooperative. And I had a sun prostration just east of Fort Smith, and it was overcome. They took me to a little drugstore, and luckily the assistant health officer in the state of Oklahoma had a drugstore there, took care of me, used bottled water from Fort Smith because they didn't have it. I told my wife when they were bringing me home that night, I was glad that didn't happen in someplace except Podunk, because it's been in the papers. Next morning, a reporter walked into my father's office. He was district deputy clerk of the United States Court in Guilford, Ohio. Said, "How's Harry?" He said, "He's fine." Last we heard from him, he said he got over his heat prostration. Said, "What?" My father said, "What prostration?" Well, he said, "Haven't you seen the Chicago Tribune?" They had a correspondent in this little town, a very small town in Oklahoma. She sent it to the Associated Press, and that story went all over the country. The Weatherman.
You weren't accustomed to the communications that media that we have now. There's no getting by them.
No, you can't get by. I don't care. You went to Haiti, I think there'd be a newspaper man there. I shouldn't say that because they're my best friend.
Well, let's see. We want to
forecasting. Let me break it. It's no better today than it was then. It's still empirical. It's experience that counts. And these young fellas come out with their doctor's degree, college, they know it all. The first thing you know, they realize they don't know it all. And
I understand they still miss it quite frequently.
I think they're not born weather forecasters. They're really made. It's empirical. And this is a 3 or 4 day forecast. And these tornadoes, you just can't forecast a tornado within 150 miles. And I don't know whether you want that story on my forecast.
Yes, we'd like to have that story, and we'd like to know just how dependable this forecasting is now.
I think they're more dependable because they have hourly reports that we didn't have. We didn't hear at 7 in the morning, 7 in the evening as far as reports. Then they have the upper air, and they have teletype that they get every hour. In fact, sometimes get dozen reports from one station. So
where does it come from? All over?
Yeah, all over the world, not only the United States.
And the satellite?
Yes, they get satellite now, but of course they didn't when I was in the Weather Bureau. And they drew these maps, and the best forecaster in the world, and one of them still living, Mr. Waitman, a dear friend of mine down in Dallas, Texas. He and his wife living with a daughter, and he and Mr. Mitchell, I think they were 2 outstanding forecasters. While Carl Rossby, noted meteorologist, according to Time magazine, a picture, doesn't know enough about forecasts coming in the rain. He made a forecast on the inaugural. He shouldn't have done it, and it was a terrible bust. Although he was a Swede, and I'm Swedish, he's one man I didn't have much use for. But Björknes is a wonderful guy. His father, he developed the fronts, and they got the word front because the war was on, and they had the elements fighting, don't you see, on the front instead of the gun.
So it was really a war term, but
the forecasters are still empirical.
Well, I believe we have a project here now, do we not, from the federal government on a special study on tornadoes?
Yes, I'm glad they're spending the money. I noticed the other night the Weather Bureau chief drew $8,000 a year back in the 1900s, about 11 or 12. and the budget for the whole United States was $874,000. Now it must be 20 or 30 million. The good old days. Now they've got so much more to work with, and it's helped that way for forecast 30 or 40 minutes ahead. I forecast for in St. Louis when my good friend Judge Moore, senior United States judge, and Mr. Mills, who was being was a newspaper man here, was being given honorary degrees at Missouri U, and I told the judge that he very likely to have thunderstorms, and during the meeting is outside the stadium, it started to pour down, and he said, "I thought of you, Mr. Wahlgren."
So sometimes you hit that.
We hit it, and weddings up there, they charged for, in St. Louis, to put up the canopies extras on Sundays and holidays, and people didn't want to spend that money for it, and they'd want weddings. And you know, I tell these folks, there's a weather that they didn't need a canopy, and then I sweat blood when the ceremony was on and the clouds appeared. But I saved thousands of dollars on flooding. We had flood warnings in those days and still have. It's the Weather Bureau that makes the flood reports, not the engineer. And our staff forecast certain stages in St. Louis, and the engineer said it would break the all-time record that was broken here just a few weeks ago, in 1973.
On the Mississippi.
And I told Alan Crotton, those big companies, not to keep on sandbagging, otherwise they would have stopped. And they wanted to pay me, give me presents. I never accepted a dime from anybody when I was in the Weather Bureau. I felt that was my word. And after I retired, the board of directors of Alan Crotton Chemical sent me a check for $500. Said that now that it was out, I could accept it. I didn't know whether I wanted a TV or whether I wanted to pay my debt.
Well, that's interesting. Tell us something about the way the young forecasters go at this now.
Well, they have to go to college and pass that degree. And I've told them, if you're smart, you'll get your doctor's degree, because it isn't what you know, it's the degrees you have that help it. I couldn't get in now as a 32nd degree janitor at the Weather Bureau, because my education...
I doubt that.
Well, that's right, because of education, that's the first thing they'd ask. And I'm strong for education. And I've talked to hundreds of kids. They'd come to my office for jobs. I wouldn't just say we can't, we're under civil service. I've got jobs for hundreds of people. That's literally true. I go out of my way to go to my Rotary plant and businessmen and others that knew me. I was so well known. Chief of police there in St. Louis had a case with a Weather Bureau man in Kansas City. Said, "Weather Bureau, oh, you're with Harry Wahlgren." I didn't. He said, "No, I'm Kansas City." Did you know Harry? He said, "No, but I hear him on the air every day. I feel it on the way." And that was a feeling up there in St. Louis. They knew Harry Wahlgren.
When did you begin to go on the air, on radio?
Oh, I went January of 1940 on WKY. And when I went to St. Louis, Pulitzer, the Post-Dispatch, wanted me to go on his NBC, KSD station, radio, of course, there was TV, and I went on, and they ran a full-page ad in the National Broadcasting Magazine with my picture.
Announcing your coming. Did you work on into the TV years?
Well, yes, I did, and I went on TV. In fact, when we had the American Meteorological Society, I was chairman of publicity, and I got General Yates and Dr. Rickenbacker for Chief of Weather Bureau, and that was still a dear friend, and
those are the United States.
Another Navy man, the president, you can't call his name, a very good friend, to go on the TV. Well, they were scared to death and they stalled and didn't appear. So Frank Asham, in charge of news on KSD-TV, said, why aren't they here? I said, I've told them, I don't know why, but they came about 10 minutes. He said, well, we've got to go on. So he and I went on and ad-libbed for 10 minutes. They came, and they went on the air. And Yates, General Yates, had a beautiful voice, fine appearance. In fact, all of them, Orville was Captain Orville, high in the Navy, was the third man. And they went on and put on a beautiful program. And after Yates and the chief of Yates was scared of Orville, took it as a joke, and he had a grand time. But anyhow, Yates ripped out a note and said, I never so blankety-blank scared in my life. He said, Mr. Wahlgren, did you hear my knees knocking? I said, no, your voice was perfect, and it was one of the finest broadcasts. Several told us that he had a beautiful voice. And the chief, same way. The chief said, well, Yates, I was just like you. That's the first time they've been on TV.
I can imagine that was quite an experience. Now then, let's talk just a little bit about the years that you were with them. With the Meteorological Society, it is now.
Get the publications free.
Tell us something about the coming of radar. How was that brought into your work?
It was radar. Real radar. But of course, the upper air was brought in years ago, and first they used airplanes, and we had a contract. I remember Clive Knuckles had one of the contracts here, and he'd fly, but he couldn't fly when the weather was bad. He'd take a meteorograph aloft, and then he'd bring it down, and that would be a year or two before we could look up the information. While this radio song, were you thinking of that? That's radio song. That goes along, and radio's back, the temperature, the humidity, and one other element, and they have that immediately. In the old days, we wouldn't get it till they went, and in bad days when we needed it, the airplanes couldn't go at all. It wasn't allowed.
Maybe you can explain this. Are there such things as weather balloons that go up?
Those date back a number of years, but they were back in probably the 20s, and we'd watch them through a theodolite, and the first ones were on the Weather Bureau.
Through a what?
Theodolite is sort of like a surveyor's instrument and a compass, and we'd get the direction and angle, and we'd have to work out how fast it was moving and what it was that height. But you didn't get too much information.
Well, now
they're still sending those radio songs along. And I imagine I don't know whether they're using balloons. I doubt.
One landed in, it looked just like a big, I guess it was plastic or rubber balloon stuff, anyway, in our backyard one time, and had a little instrument attached to it, and asked us to mail it immediately to so-and-so, and call such and such a number here in Oklahoma City, which we did immediately. And we were so interested in to find out what we had and what happened, and so on. We, of course, sent it in right away, but we never did hear from them to know what we had or what we'd done.
Sorry that happened, because they should have known.
And that's all right.
Those things cost about $40, $50 then. I don't know what. And they revamped thousands of them at Joliet. They used them a dozen times. They reworked and saved probably millions of dollars. But I was talking about balloons. Before that, they had just a big balloon that they sent along and watched through that. They didn't have any instrument on them at all. Just a balloon, a great big red or blue, depending on the color of the weather.
And they got the upper air.
Yes, they got the upper air. and they got the wind movement at that elevation. But later they got these radio songs that are attached to a balloon. And the other year last year, a balloon was sent aloft from Rapid City, Dakota, Rapid City in South Dakota, or north, I forget now. Well, anyhow, it was found about 20 miles from where it was, the Weather Bureau, on a farm. And the Weather Bureau man that took the observation and released the balloon, it was found on his brother's farm. Isn't that something?
Well, this was quite a neighborhood discussion because it was not long after World War II. And, of course, we were very conscious of Germans and spies and everything. And so when we saw this coming very, very slowly, the air was not moving much that day. And, my son came running in and told me, "Look, Mother, look what's in the sky. It's coming down." And so the neighbors saw it, and we gathered, and it dropped right in our backyard. Well, you can imagine the consternation, and some of the people just knew that it was a German spy instrument.
Yeah, we had hundreds of calls. People would see these things and they thought they were German instruments, bombs or what have you, and they'd see a medium in the sky and the smoke, and they'd swear it made a swastika because swastika was indiscretion. In fact, during that First World War, our country was silly enough to make the Weather Bureau and the government buildings a shade. We had to buy light cloth to put over every window at the Weather Bureau so we could carry on and they couldn't see any light in there. And 19th class was just like a morgue with these black curtains, heavy down. Yeah. And our
we really had blackouts then.
Not only that, but the meteorograph and other instruments, we covered them with cloth and had somebody on duty so they couldn't get in and steal our weather records. Not that they would, I don't think they would. It was silly. Well, they could have, but it wouldn't have been worth anything to them because that record was already made.
You were telling me something about meeting up with Mr. Shirk, the president of our historical society in Oklahoma, and you spoke of something that you found for the historical society, some old instrument. What did you call it?
Kiosk. K-I-O-S-K. It stood at on the sidewalk, southwest corner of Carnegie Library on 4th and Robinson for years. It weighed several tons. And it showed the temperature, and it had a rain gauge. It showed the rain and showed the high and low temperature. And also
all right.
Picture this kiosk of Mr. Shirk, and he asked where it was. Well, Mr. Patterson bought it. His brother was Joe Patterson, city commissioner, hauled it down to this place near the Union Station in Southtown, and it was there in the yard for years.
And how much did it weigh?
It weighed a couple, probably tons. It was very heavy metal and stood about 10 feet and was probably at least 5 feet square. And it stood there, and the 4 panels in class, you see, and then we put a weather bulletin in there, weather map, so people would see that and other information. Stood there for years, and Mr. Shirk sent him this picture and showed that and a few little buildings near the Carnegie Library. The big buildings weren't there, and he saw old OT on a telephone pole, Ozark Trail, so he knew it had been taken years before. And I sent him a picture of the Weather Bureau when there wasn't a thing from 18th to 22nd except the Weather Bureau and the upper buildings that I told you. And he saw the interurban switch there in front of the building that I didn't see. And coincidental, I went to go see clinics, and there's a big man sat next to me, and we said hello. And
Now, this was just the other day.
In May of '73, and he sat there reading, I sat reading, and I called Mr. Shirt, asked the girl as he passed out. I said, was that Mr. George Shirt? Said, yes, and I kicked myself ever since that I didn't speak to him. But he doesn't know that he and I sat next to each other.
And I probably already had this order from Mr. Shirt to, suggestion rather, to get you on a tape. And this begins our third side on the second tape. This is side one. I believe that the other tape ran out at approximately at the time that we were discussing the freakish storms. I'm going to ask you to repeat just a little bit about these unusual things that either happened or else they were fixed to happen.
You take tornadoes. In the old days, when I was a kid, it was cyclone. If you'd have said tornado to a native Kentuckian, Iowa, he wouldn't know what you're talking about, because they were twisters or they were cyclones. Now then, a cyclone is simply a low pressure area with the circulation counterclockwise, distinguished from the anticyclone or high. And the tornado, you would never believe anything occurred. In fact, a friend of mine who wrote a book on tornadoes that only you put on Mr. Flora, I think I spoke about it before. He
What's
said,
the title of that book? I've heard of it.
Tornado. No, you put out. And Dr. Perchiga is going to write one. He's called you. He's the man who told you this. Well, anyhow, Pat Connor was quite a character in charge of Kansas City Weather Bureau. Widely quoted on papers because he always saying something cute. He said he'd believe anything on tornadoes except the story that it took one of these large rendering kettles about 3 foot in diameter and made of cast iron. Maybe you've seen them. They
used to wash
hogs in them, and they made live. But he said he'd believe anything except the story that it turned one of those inside out. But that's for near true, because it does such freakish things. But anything that, well, you read the recent paper, that counts the paper. Now, I had a picture down south here of a piano that was taken from the schoolhouse and put up in a tree. I can't find it, but in the local paper this week, about June 1st, there's a picture of a house that's demolished, and the upright piano stands there unharmed. So, believe anything you put in there, you hear, although pictures can be adopted. In fact, one of the old-time glass plates that they used to come down the Weather Bureau basement for years, and that thing has been doctored up with white chalk to make a beautiful tornado.
It had been slightly retouched.
And then there, of course, colored lightning. People ask, is there green lightning on? Yes, it depends on the atmosphere. Then they ask about meteorites. We have here in Oklahoma City had a wonderful display of a meteor. It left its trail for 30 minutes.
When was this?
Oh, that was back in the 30s, probably 38 or thereabouts. Well, anyhow, I wrote it up for Washington and drew a picture in color, and it got to one of the outstanding broadcasters in New York, and he wanted me to come to New York City and appear on the radio and describe it. But I refused because I was not an expert in meteorites. I would say I'm fairly meteorologist. Meteors and meteorology had no bearing. In the old days, too, the Weather Bureau collected reports on
Oh,
They
did
had
you?
charge of that as well as river and a bunch of other things.
Well, we didn't have many in Oklahoma, did we?
Earthquakes, we've had dozens of them. Round El Reno and here, and I've never felt one either here in St. Louis like they've had.
But they registered it.
Most severe in history of the world was down in southeast Missouri. It divided the Mississippi River and made real
Now, that was back in
1820s, 40s. And if that had been a densely populated area, thousands would have been killed. But and it was felt in New England, the earthquake. And it lasted for days. I don't know, I think from Christmas, happened about Christmas, and then on till well into the spring, they had earthquakes every day. That's in southeast Missouri, and that's getting close. And there is an area through central Missouri that is on a fault that we could have.
Well, we're not too far from the fault.
But I wasn't worried about it because odds are about 1,000,000 to 1. You could start out with a tornado, looking for it, and go 50 years. Did I tell about Mr. Flores' house? He wanted to see a tornado. He lived in one house 50 years, and he retired, and his wife and he were going to travel. They got to Topeka to Skirvin, Missouri, and had an auto accident. She was killed, and he was injured. And a year later died. A year later than that, they had the Topeka tornado that destroyed his home. He never saw a tornado, though he wrote a book on tornadoes. And another thing,
He never saw one?
no, he never saw one. And you and I could start out, we wouldn't see it. A lot of people say they see tornadoes, they see a, what they call them, a matter-cumulus cloud. The cloud, instead of being at the top, the bottom comes up like, and that matter, belly of the wave, that's where it gets the name. And people see that. And I had a tornado scare out toward Edmond. A person saw a tornado, a beautiful tornado. It was smoke. Somebody took a picture of that smoke and the building in front of it. Had a beautiful tornado there. And that wasn't hail. We've had some of the most severe hailstorms in the country. It damaged a packard car, and those two school teachers were in. And they had a letter from the insurance company that didn't believe it did the damage. But luckily, the Daily Oklahoma had taken a picture of that packard. It was riddled with holes from the hail. And they paid the claims. And then hail the size of baseball and golf ball. Quite often they're a cluster of hailstones. And there's so many things that occur in weather and so many places.
But now, I thought I saw this tornado as it came from a cloud, like you said, it was belly-shaped on the underneath side, and I didn't pay too much attention to it, except that I noticed that it was moving in circular. All right, then this little tail came down, and it came right down 6th Street there. And that's when I turned back and got in the basement. Was that an actual tornadic cloud before it struck?
That wind, nobody knows, it's probably 400 or 500 miles an hour. And you take a wind now, 60-mile wind is not twice the 30. It's 4 times. It's a square. A 90-mile wind would be 3 times the 30. It would be 9 times as strong as a 30-mile wind. Square the ratio.
And that's how you figure the mile be.
And we have some very, I probably have one of the finest private collections of tornado clouds and tornado sequences more than I took pictures.
Oh, you do?
And that's why this Japanese professor came down here to get my pictures. He borrowed and had copies made.
Oh, tell us about that.
Well, he came down here and said one thing I might say first. He told Rod and I can't understand you people, Oklahoma. I said, why? He said, because you don't seem to be worried about tornadoes. I said, well, you know as well as I do you can't forecast, and they're only half a mile wide as a rule. And the odds are, if I tried to get caught in a tornado, I couldn't possibly do it if I lived to be 110 years old. because they're only very, very small, but the wind is terrific, how much nobody knows. And then he said they had pictures of chickens being plucked and not hurt, and he didn't believe it. I said, that's true. Right here on 10th Street, my brother saw it in Muskogee. Remember the school for the deaf, was it? It took that school, and we saw chickens that had been plucked and yet lived. And there isn't anything until tornadoes can't do. When they could run a little piece of lath through a heavy steel webbing of the East Bridge.
Well, now, is that due to a change in pressure, or how did they...
Nobody can understand it. You and I could make a hole in that bridge the size of that lath and pound it in. It would probably break the lath before we got it in there. Nobody knows. That's why they study down at Norman. I'm glad to see them make study, but as far as advance, I don't think they made any advance. It was started here at Tinker Field by a couple of fellows that got promotions through it, but Bob Edson of Red Cross, who later became the head of it in Washington, now passed away, he came down and made a study of it. He said they didn't have it as far as it wasn't minute enough, decisive enough to be worthwhile to Red Cross.
Is theirs mostly done through tabulation of the various temperatures aloft and the fronts that come in?
It's generally a low pressure area with warm moist air and a high pressure with cold dry air. And those cold, dry air and the warm meet and cause this disturbance. That's the most accepted theory. But it's only theory.
It is?
That's right. Because we don't know if Sam heard. And we think tornadoes killed about 10,000 people in 50 years in the United States. And we kill 54,000 a year on the streets by automobile. And yet people are frightened and worried about tornadoes. They should be used cautiously, but there's no use getting excited when you hear a warning that tornadoes are possible from Wichita, Kansas to Wichita, Florida, 40 miles east. Well, when that tornado, if you put a dot there, that would be 100 times larger than the area hit.
Then you think that the warning, when they warn you and say it's time to take cover to find a safe place, then that is... But that's after it's actually been sighted, either above the ground or is striking somewhere.
Particularly the southwest, and get in the southwest part of your cellar if you can.
In the southwest?
Southwest corner, because 9 out of 10 companies move from southwest to northeast. And you just can't tell. Freakish out here then, remember they had tornado, and we went out there immediately after it was over, Mark and I had to make a report on it, and went to a house, half of it blown away, and the family that lived there came man and wife, turned out we know. They said, our son is an invalid in a wheelchair, and he was in that house. It developed that he was in that house and was perfectly safe. It took the other half, and he sat and watched that tornado from his wheelchair. It's remarkable. You could tell story after story on it.
That's what we were interested in, and any explanations or theories that you have, we'd appreciate getting those.
I don't have any theories because I have a theory that you just can't forecast in the full sense anymore. That's not a forecast when you say...
Well, you can't pinpoint them in advance.
Just like the Japanese, the head of the Japanese meteorological section was a friend of mine, and we were discussing that with Father McElwain, an outstanding seismologist, authority on earthquakes, and we said that wasn't forecasting. When you say a big area like the Japanese said, it's just like forecasting an earthquake in Japan. today and tomorrow and the next day. He says you'll have them every day someplace, but where? We don't know. Same way with the seismologists and seismographers. Seismographer recorded an earthquake, but you can't forecast it.
I was surprised to find that there's so many little tremblers of the Earth's surface that we don't even know about, but yet the delicate instruments will show.
That reminds me of a cartoon that Litchi made. His very dear friend of mine, the cartoonist Litchi, Rickenbacker. He made a cartoon for that Dr. McElwain got. There are scientists there and a seismograph, and the fellow's eating crackers. And he said, Melby or whatever name he used, for goodness sake, stop eating those crackers. It's bothering this seismograph. I thought that was a pretty cute story. And I had a picture of that Litchi made and sent me autograph that I gave to a grandson that looking at the weather map. It said rain, hail, thunder, lightning, just like I forecast. He says, Winby or whatever his name was, it's great to be alive.
How long did you work here with the weather?
I was here from 1911 till 43 when a week moment I went to St. Louis. And then I was
then back again.
43 to 57. And I retired after 50 years and 17 days, and I was gone 4 more years because I was only 66, having gone in as passenger at 16. But I decided I might not be living a year from now. And here it is, I'm 83, and still
going. We can't always get those dates straight, can we?
No.
That part is kind of neat. What would you name as the most important advance that has been made in weather forecasting?
Teletype, having that in the hourly reports, and probably the fronts on